Okay, Alan, this is especially for you and Desiree, and this is the book that we're using. Okay, now you can pay a whole lot of money for this, or a little bit of money, or you can get it for free. Okay, over at the Whip Church website, pbchurch.com, you can see it here. Go to links and then church history. You'll be able to see that these books are actually available. The lessons in church history, the class notes, can be, you can get the hardcover. Let me do this. The paperback, or you can get it as a PDF download. Okay, the PDF download is available for free. For hardcover or for paperback, it's up on Amazon.com at that link. And then, okay, that's his paperback there. Okay, I have to change the link so one can get it for hardcover. Okay. There it is, the hardcover. I'll change that link. But it is available for free as a PDF to download. It's just that I recommend when reading stuff like this, it is better to read it in regular paper because you have a better vision, peripheral vision to scan back and forth. But it is available PDF to scan through things. It's also available up at Small Church SOS. Where is it at? So it's available here also, and that's an online business thing. Also at here, you go to the class videos. You can get all of the lessons, starting from the first lesson at the bottom of the page. These are the videos for this. And everybody else, if you want to ever go back and review something, it'll always be up there too. Okay. So we are here looking at lessons in church history. This is based on when we left off teaching through the Revelation. And we had looked at the seven churches of the Revelation and how they really correspond to time periods in church history. So you have the seven churches covering the time from the early church, from the times of Christ, all the way up to the Laodicean age, which maybe we're in, maybe we're not. Usually you can look back with 2020 hindsight to see how things might have been, but we might be in the Laodicean age. And then with Revelation chapter 4, verse 1, this is identified as you don't see the church anymore in the book of the Revelation until the end when it becomes the bride of Christ. So that you have the rapture at Revelation 4:1. So that also helps us see that these seven churches are not just a question of the Apostle John giving a shout out to his homies, as I like to say. Okay, he's not just saying, "Oh, by the way, hi guys here and hi guys there." No, he's chosen these churches with their problems. There were other churches in Asia. He chose these churches. I did that already, by the way. Okay, these churches were chosen with their specific problems because they would correspond to the different ages that we went through. In the Ephesian age from 30 to 100 AD, this is a time when even though you had the apostles and they had just been learning directly from Jesus Christ, nevertheless, churches were already slipping into apostasy, and there were already false teachers that were coming in, not necessarily with bad intentions, just selfish intentions, and as I was saying this morning, with a power grab. Okay, so they began to lose their first love right away for Christ as they were going off into other things. Then you had the next 200 years, from 100 to 300, with Smyrna, which is characterized as the suffering church. And as the suffering church, they had a lot of persecutions. There were 10 persecutions that they had to deal with, just like it describes for the Smyrna church. And out of that time came what especially important to us for today's lesson is the establishment of the state church, how the church became united with the state. At first it was compromised as with the seed of Satan, where the pagan priesthood in the Roman system was wed to the church at Rome, and that Constantine thought he was doing a great thing by stopping the persecution. Something that was nice to not have anybody trying to kill you anymore. But this paved the way for that Roman government mentality to become fused with the church there, at which time the popes, they were not popes at first. Okay, the word pope came in later on, and the Roman church claimed first primacy and then supremacy over the other churches, and then finally supremacy over secular governments over the course of the next 1,000 years. But that all started when Constantine had that compromise. Then it turned into the tolerant church, where now many pagan practices and beliefs were being fused with church doctrine. A lot of times, you'll have heard me say that teachings about Mary were not based upon misinterpretations of the scripture. They were based on pagan goddess worship that was brought into the church. And there were other things like transubstantiation and the washing away of sins and things like that. They were not based on misinterpretations of the Bible. They were based upon importation of those beliefs from the pagan religions. We're here still looking at the Sardis age. The Sardis church is known as a dead church. And this represents the time period of the Reformation. And as I have pointed out, the Reformation, but wasn't that a good thing? Oh yeah, it was good. There were good things that were happening. Things were breaking down. The political power of the Catholic Church was being diminished. The apostasy and the immorality of the Roman Catholic system was giving fuel to people wanting to have reform, but they got caught up in stagnant creeds and belief systems or statements of faith, and so that is going to give rise to number one. It's going to give rise to the church not being wed to the state. That's going to happen in the Philadelphia age, but during this time, this was breaking down. The state church idea was breaking down, and then there was a influx of scriptures, because now the Textus Receptus has been forward and the Bible was being translated into English, and a number of these factors gave rise to people really challenging what church was supposed to be about, which is going to bring us to the time of the Baptists. We've talked about the Reformation and how the Reformation leaders, they did a great job of really challenging things. They came out of the Catholic Church. They just didn't come out far enough. In fact, one of the teens was talking about how he was at a church and he said, oh, they're having an infant baptism here today. And I thought, good, you've been listening to our lessons. And this was one of the beliefs that was brought forward, the idea that baptism could actually wash away sins. Don't tell that to the thief on the cross. He didn't get to be baptized. Okay, but things like that were being challenged, and this is going to be where, as we're going to look today, how Baptists really came forward. So we've looked at the Reformation. We're going to go over to, and I don't have further slides for right now. Everything's going to be from the book. This brings us to page 203. I don't think I have another book for you to share. Okay, page 203, where it talks about Baptist and Anabaptist churches. This is a whole new category of church history within that Sardis age, a whole new category. Looked at the Reformation, the Renaissance, the bringing forward of the scriptures. What about the Baptists? They were also active at this time in history too. So some of these things I'm going to read straightforwardly here because it gives us a lot of information. What you want to think of is the term free church. Free church. Why the free church? That means it is not a state church. Have you ever heard of, for instance, up in Jersey City, Broome Street Evangelical Free Church? And did you ever wonder, why did they say free? Where did that come from? It's identifying that they are not a state church. The word evangelical church was used by the Lutheran churches. They were not known as Lutherans at the start. Luther didn't know what to call themselves, so he said the evangelical church, meaning that they were all about the gospel. And that was a good name to use. They didn't know what else to use. But you had the evangelical church or the Lutheran churches that were endorsed by the state, the German state, or it could be one of the other Scandinavian states. And so they then developed into an evangelical free church, meaning that they had that Lutheran doctrine, but they were not under the authority of the state. They were free of it. They were independent of it. This is a very key concept. It is that free church mentality that's going to give us the Philadelphian age. The free church mentality, which if you're a little bit astute, you would say, oh yes, that goes along with the American independence, where War of Independence, because that's where you had freedom of religion. You did not have a state church in America. You only had free churches. Now, they did try to have an effort to have a state church a little bit. In fact, the Baptists were asked, I'm thinking maybe by Jefferson, I can't remember, but there was an idea of having Baptist churches, and Baptists said, no, you don't want to do that. I mean, they could have said, yeah, let's have us take the seat of power now. Let us be the head church over everything. But Baptists, by their nature, as we're going to see today, believe in the independence of the church. So we're going to get into that. Now, it is not just a question of being a Baptist church. There are Baptistic churches. For instance, Jonathan has a friend who's challenging him, and it's very nice. He's trying to get into apologetics and to argue for the Lord. And his friend says, "Oh yeah, Baptists started in 600 A.D., the same time as the Muslims, and so they are not a real church. It's only the Orthodox Church that you have." And I said, "Well, tell your friend that he's not serious, and that if he's really serious, he'll come over and talk more." Okay, but he only wants to just win an argument is what he wants to do. However, he cheats by it. I said to him, go over to Matthew, I think it's Matthew 3:1, and you see recorded there about John, who? the Baptist. And that's an old joke amongst Baptists. Okay, um, but they just got started being called Baptists around 1600, as we're going to see here. But Baptist-like churches always existed from the very time of Jesus Christ. They didn't get called Baptists, but what they were independent churches by one name or another. And you still have the same thing here in the modern world, because you have independent churches of all kinds, like Plymouth Brethren churches. You might know of some other, I don't want to say denominations, I'm going to say names of churches, names of movements. They're Baptist-like, okay, meaning that they hold the same kind of principles of independence. Key word is the independence of the churches. Baptist was just a name that stuck. So that's what you want to key on. The free church, the independent churches. We do not say denomination. Okay, a lot of people, they think of how there are, when they think of Christianity, how it's organized, they'll say, well, you have Catholic or Protestant, and they will lump in Baptists with Protestants. Okay, and that probably happens in other movements too, getting called a denomination, just a Protestant denomination. Baptists and independent churches did not protest the Catholic Church. They did not try to reform the Catholic Church. They said, you reformers, and nice what you're doing, but you're fighting a losing battle. Don't try to just reform things. Don't carry on in the same traditions because you're lost in your reforms. Don't just carry the same old things forward. Scrap the whole thing. Just scrap it. Start from fresh. And so, whereas the Catholic Church is founded on the Bishop of Rome, the Pope, okay, founded upon Peter and his successors, and the Protestant churches might use something like the Westminster Confession of Faith that they're founded on. Guess what Baptists are founded on? Okay, the Bible. So we will say that we might have a statement of faith. That's a shortcut way of working with things. Statements of faith have problems because they're created by us humans. Okay, but it's a way to try to get information out. But we'll say specifically that no, we are not subscribing to the statement of faith. We're subscribing to the Bible, and that's going to be the sole authority in the church. And other independent churches have that same mentality. Yes.
It's a little bit off topic, but you mentioned the evangelical free churches. Did you say they came out of the Lutheran churches?
Might have been Lutheran. I'd have to look up even more, but yeah.
Okay. Do they tend to be liturgical churches then?
I don't know. A lot of people know like Chuck Swindoll, and he was a wonderful preacher in many regards.
Yeah, he was a compromiser, but
not all regards.
Right.
But he was a long time an evangelical free pastor.
Yeah, and I thought
I'm pretty sure.
I mean, regardless of his position on certain things, but he did preach the Bible.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
So I'd have to look, more specifically. That one I won't be covering later on.
Okay.
But that's one of those many things that one could.
Because at the end of the day, Lutheran churches still perform a mass.
Okay. Now you've got the Missouri Synod of the Lutheran Church, which is more conservative, and I think there's an even more conservative synod than that. So if you, to whatever degree people follow the Bible, that's how good they are.
Well, yeah, that's understood. I just didn't know if the evangelical free church came out of the Lutheran church, like the way you said. I wasn't sure.
No, they might have not come out of. They might have just been.
Okay.
Because they used the name evangelical. Tell you what, if
we can check it out.
Text me to look that up.
Okay. That sounds good. Thank you.
And like Broome Street Evangelical Free Church, I understand is a really good church up there. I've talked to the pastor one time when there was somebody who was traveling amongst churches, and it was really nice to talk to. Okay. So now we are not a Baptist denomination. Okay, a denomination sounds like it's talking about a name. That's where the word denomination comes from the word, a name. A denomination is going to have a headquarters somewhere. Baptists do not have a headquarters. Okay, now you say, well, yeah, but what about the Southern Baptist Convention? No. That is separate from the churches that call themselves Southern Baptists. They are independent. And the Southern Baptist Convention, the group of delegates who are joining together to try to, grease the works of the wheels of the church, that convention has no power over the Southern Baptist churches. They can't dictate to them what to do. Okay, now they might pressure them, because that is an issue that some people wonder about. They might have social pressure, but they cannot decide things and impose it upon the churches. This is one thing that's nice about a truly independent church. We cannot impose our beliefs on another church. They cannot impose their beliefs on us. We're free to work together. Okay, that we can do. You can cooperate, but there's no organizational authoritative structures between the two. So some people have said, when you say, well, then who's the authority at People's Baptist Church? Okay, it's not the pastor. Okay, although if you want to think that, you go right ahead. Okay. The authority is the congregation. It's the congregation, and we've gone over that, I think, a little bit. In fact, on page 202 and the top of 203, it talks about the different forms of polity that different groups have, or their authority structures. Okay, so, well, actually, that's specifically page 202. So you can see how they work with things like that. There is no hierarchy in Baptist churches. There's no authority save for Jesus Christ through the believers of the church, the congregation of the church. This is why church membership is such an important aspect. More than that, I will say when I go through church membership lessons, if anybody wants to go through them, I go through a whole more thorough teaching. I will be carrying on some of this when I get to September and we start talking about sermons from the theology of the church. So we'll get some of it then. Okay, so let's, at the top of page 203 there where it says Baptist and Anabaptist churches, baptism and citizenship. This is what set Baptists apart from both the Protestant and the Catholic churches. The idea of baptism and citizenship. Remember, the Protestants carrying on from Catholicism, infant baptism, and by that you were being made a member of the church. You were also being made a member of the state. That was your citizenship as well, because the church was a state church. When you were baptized into the church, you were baptized into the state. So just reading here, as they gained prominence, Baptists became identified by their opponents as Baptists. At first they were called Anabaptists. Ana is a Greek prefix that means up, or you can say rebaptized. It was used as a term of derision and condemnation. So they're out there giving them adult baptism, and they would look at them and sneer and say, "You Baptist, you." Okay. It's ironic, since Baptists place the least encumbrance on the significance of baptism, while Catholicism and Protestantism the most. They're the ones that make more of baptism than what it should be made. We have the least made of it. It's very significant, okay? People should be getting baptized, but in comparing the two, they're the ones who think that baptism washes away original sin. We don't believe that. They make it something even more significant because they impose it on their children. We say, no, you got to be a believer first. Then you can get baptized. And they also made this a requirement for being a member of the state, a citizen. The significant difference is laid on the fact that for the centralized churches, that means the Protestant churches, that was a central church over everybody, or the Catholic Church was a central church over everybody, which were tied to the state, rebaptism was a repudiation of the authority of the state. When you had people who had come to the age of reason, and now they were choosing on their own to accept Christ as their Savior, and not assumed at birth to be saved, then it was at that point that they were eligible for baptism. Well, what does that say for you? The first baptism they had, they were rejecting the state baptism, emphasis on the word state. So what they were rejecting was the state by being baptized as an adult. To be baptized as an infant was to be declared not only a communicant of the church, but a citizen of the state to which the church was tied. There were some variations on this, but the pressure was to identify with the community through baptism. Various states established prohibitions against getting rebaptized. Let's look through these. Okay, this thing about being a Baptist or an Anabaptist it was pervasive. It was all over the place. Because remember, there were always independent churches of one name or another all through history. Now they are coming more to the rise because of the whole idea of the Reformation, and people saying, yeah, no, just, again, scrap it, start all over with the Bible. So in Switzerland, Swiss cantons, and like counties or states, including Zurich and Bern, had strict laws against Anabaptism. Ulrich Zwingli, that's a name we've referenced before. Okay, he was a leading reformer in Zurich. He opposed the Anabaptists, and some Anabaptists were executed or expelled from the city. So that was Switzerland. In Germany, several German states, both Protestant and Catholic, passed laws against Anabaptism. The punishment for Anabaptists could include imprisonment, fines, and even death. In the Netherlands, the Dutch Republic had a range of responses to Anabaptism, with some provinces more tolerant than others. In some regions, Anabaptists were subjected to persecution and restrictions. In England, during the English Reformation, Anabaptists were viewed with suspicion. Laws were passed to suppress their activities. Even King James, when he was getting ready to have the King James Version translated, he had the Anglican priests and the Puritans, they were working together. Baptists were, they were pushed off to the side. The Holy Roman Empire in Europe, laws against Anabaptism were enforced in various regions of the Holy Roman Empire, including areas that later became parts of present-day Germany and Austria. In Roman Catholic states, Anabaptists were often persecuted and their practices were prohibited. The Catholic Church considered Anabaptism a heresy. And there are groups that are called Anabaptist today. We're used to Baptist churches. Anabaptists, and I'm failing for a word. They're prominent down around Lancaster. No, not the Amish, the other ones. The Mennonites. Yes, thank you. The Mennonites would call themselves Anabaptists, and they're coming from that same kind of heritage. Okay, so we go over to page 204 where we look at the Baptist distinctives. What does it mean to be a Baptist? Now, again, and I do this all the time when I talk about Baptist distinctives or whatever, I point out again, we have no statement of faith. There is no actual definition of Baptists. There's no actual definition. However, what is common to them are listed on this page here. And it would be called the Baptist distinctives, and it's based on an acronym for BAPTIST. Go Baptist, go Baptist. Okay. Uh, yeah. Okay. So paragraph 574 at the top of page 204. In order to appreciate the historical development of Baptist churches in this time period, an understanding of the Baptist distinctives is important. What makes them different from other church movements? Churches as Baptists began to appear in this age of decentralization. As church-state power began to break down and denominations started to coalesce, started to group together, Baptists became more clearly identified. It was not as though churches like Baptists had not existed before. They had, just not by that name, but the common distinctions were clearly associated with Baptist congregations, and they existed with greater transparency of operation. They came out more in the open to work. Various Baptists placed a greater or lesser significance on a connection of Baptist churches over the course of church history. Okay, so they were all through church history this was true. But what is clearly significant was the degree to which churches struggled for a free church adhering to the Bible as its authority. The Baptist distinctives are commonly taught by the acronym Baptist. So we're looking for a free church. It's not authorized by the state. It's not endorsed by the state. It's not governed by the state. It is governed by the Bible. But how do they organize? Again, these are the common things. So B, now, if this sounds like you were in a Sunday school class recently, that's why, okay? And this gets taught every once in a while. B, biblical authority. Baptists emphasize the authority of the Bible as the sole rule of faith and practice. Now, a lot of other people believe in the Bible too, not as the sole rule. What does the Roman Catholic Church also appeal to as a rule of authority? Tradition. And you can see that in the Catholic Catechism at the Vatican website. You can see it for yourself, which a lot of Catholics don't even know what they're supposed to be believing. And sometimes you got to teach them how to be a Catholic before you can help them get out of Catholicism. Okay, Baptists believe that the Bible is the ultimate source of guidance for matters of faith and church life. This is something that I find very interesting when we're out and about and we're reaching out to people. Regularly we get comments that they say, oh, you're all about the Bible, or you teach the Bible. They don't know us from anything. We're just handing them a tract and inviting them out. They hear Baptist and they say, oh, yeah, that's what you're all about. Now, I find this to be interesting also because the word Baptist conveys that. Could you drop the name Baptist? Sure, you could do that. It's not a good idea. Why? Because you see, the word Baptist essentially is like a marketing tool. It's a label. If I said to you, I'm a Republican, you would say, oh, you must believe such and such and such and such. If I said I'm a Democrat, you say, oh, you must believe such and such and such and such. Okay. If I said I'm from Delaware, you wouldn't know what that means because you have no experience. But Nancy found out all about it. Okay, what it was like to be from Delaware. Okay. Why do they have a chicken for a mascot for the University of Delaware? Actually, it's a rooster. It's a fighting rooster, though. Okay. Why would they do that? Okay. So that, you have your heritage and your culture. And Brother Alvin, you're from Guyana, right? Okay. And I'm going to guess that there are some unique things about Guyanese culture. Yes. Sure. Once you say Guyana, you say, oh yeah, the Guyanese are kind of like this and this and this and this. Okay. If you say Polish or Italian, you think, oh yeah, this is these are some things. Now, yes, that can become fruit for racial problems because you have prejudice. Oh, you're German, you must be like this then. Well, no, not really. I'm not a Nazi. Okay. but there, it serves to communicate a little bit. So I like to say Baptist because it gives us an idea. We had some Moonies come by one time. and they sat in the back of the church, back in that back pew, and they were wanting to maybe it was just me and Nancy to a special conference or something like that. And so I'm saying, well, what kind of group are you with? Well, no, we're not from any particular kind of group. We're just trying to get. Well, if you ask enough questions, you will figure out things later on. And they were Moonies. I said, well, thank you, but no thank you. Okay, Moonies, a cult. I had somebody, they wanted to offer us some literature to look into for the church, and I said, well, what kind of church does this come from? Oh, not from a particular church, we're just Christian. Okay, well, and I thought to myself, I gotta pull teeth again, and they're trying to be polite, they're trying to really just promote things. And so I found out what group they were from and their doctrine. I said, oh, okay, yeah, no, we don't do that, thank you very much. Okay, I'll have somebody call up and say, I used to get these, they wanted us to get some videos, some cartoon videos about the Bible for kids. And I had to say a big no, because all those things, they have some weird historical errors in them. Okay, it's the nature of trying to make a cartoon out of things. And no, that's okay, we're going to pass on that. So labels are very good. The Baptist label is a very fine label because it is well established as a label, and people have expectations. Being all about the Bible is one of those things. I don't know where they got it from because I don't know the history, their particular history, but I am so glad that that's what they identify with us. And they'll identify Baptists all across America, really very much the same way. So sometimes people think, okay, if you get rid of the name Baptist, you might look like you're more inclusive. No, we're very exclusive, okay? Somebody said, you fundamentalist Baptists are narrow-minded. Yes, I am. How narrow-minded am I? This narrow, okay? That narrow. That's a good narrow to be. No, we say that we're supposed to separate from the world. So yes, we do exclude the world to be able to be more in tune with the kingdom of God. Okay, so Baptist is good. Now, I also often have to say, no, Baptists are not the only true church. And in fact, if you look up in there's a book published each year about all the denominations of America, and you look up Baptists, there's like 3 zillion different kinds of Baptist associations. I don't know about 3 zillion, but maybe 2 zillion. Okay, but there's a whole bunch of them. You got 2 Seed in the Spirit Baptists. You got some Seventh-day Baptists. Nancy and I were traveling through an area, and they had a bunch of Seventh-day Baptist churches down in South Jersey. I said, well, they started their churches like that. And some of them have some beliefs that we would say, no, I don't think I want to be associated with that. But what the true Baptists are, in my opinion, in fact, I'll tell people a lot of times, you have good Baptists and bad Baptists. And for me, a good Baptist is one who's trying to follow the Bible. Not going to be perfect because we're human and we might have some misinterpretations that we have to correct along the way. And you have bad Baptists. They're the ones who say, well, this is a myth in the Bible, and the Bible was put together over years and has some errors in it. And I would say, well, then you don't know the Bible. And so I label you as a bad Baptist. And they tend to go along with like a social gospel. You tend towards more a social gospel than Christian gospel of Christ. Okay, so B, biblical authority, very important point. A, autonomy of the local church, autonomos. Nomos is also name, it's also law. So we are auto-ruled. We are ruled by ourselves. Baptists believe in the autonomy or self-governance of individual local churches. Each church is considered independent and self-determining in its decisions and practices. And though we don't have a Baptist creed that we all have to adhere to, as far as I can tell, all Baptist churches, all churches that call themselves Baptist, are all independent and self-governing. Not because they have to be, that's just the way it falls out. P, priesthood of all believers. Baptists affirm the priesthood of all believers, which means that every believer has direct access to God. He doesn't need a priest to go between him and God, or a Mary, or a saint. No, we go directly to God, and the responsibility to interpret Scripture for themselves. There is no need for an intermediary priesthood. Just like we saw, I think it was last week, the Catholic Church says you got to go through a priest, you got to go through the magisterium of the church. You're not allowed to interpret the Bible for yourself, according to the Council of Trent from about this time period. And we say, no, you've got to believe things. This is why you'll hear me say periodically, take your Bibles, open them up, okay, read it for yourself. If you don't see it the same way that I do, make sure you change, because I'm perfect and you know nothing. No, I don't say that. I say, you've got to see it for yourself. And you've got to stand before God with what you believe He has shown you. You can't blame it on me. If I do say something that's off, it's incumbent upon you to prove things for yourself. And that's what the priesthood of all believers is referring to. 2 ordinances. Two ordinances. We don't do sacraments. Okay, sacraments are things that impart some kind of spiritual value to you. You get baptized and you get some righteousness added to you, and you get your sins taken away according to Protestantism and Catholicism. We say no. When you get baptized, what gets imparted to you is you get wet. Right? That's what baptism does to you. But we get baptized out of obedience to Christ. Okay, that we do it that way. So it's not a sacrament, it is obeying an order from Christ, hence 2 ordinances. And the Lord's Supper. Communion does not make you more righteous. It is your response to God, and it's the only 2 ordinances that Jesus gave. Okay, individual soul liberty. Individual soul liberty is the belief that each person has the freedom and responsibility to make decisions about their faith and conscience. This includes the freedom to interpret the Bible and to make choices in religious matters without coercion. In September, I will be talking about the covenant of the church. We live in a covenant relationship where we make promises to each other. It is not a contract. In a contract, you have you have certain rights or materials in exchange for consideration. That's a legal term that means you gave some kind of money, okay? Or it could be some kind of goods. Consideration is that. No, we have a covenant, okay? I promise I'm going to be here every Sunday that I can be here. I'm going to preach. I'm going to try to be available and everything. And you got to promise that you're going to be here. But what happens if you're missing? Do I then say, oh, okay, I don't have to be here Sunday? Actually, what would that be like if it was reversed? If I said, oh, I'm going to be missing, and I'm not going to tell you why, and you're all here. Okay, Joe's fumbling through papers to get a sermon pulled together real quick because he's probably next up, or maybe Tona's here trying to say, what can I do to preach or something like that. Okay, no, if I get screwy, let's say I were to fall down steps or something like that, okay, and not be available, that doesn't mean that everybody else is free from their responsibilities. That's what it means to be in a covenant relationship. We are here freely. Nobody's forced to do anything. No matter how much I might yell at you, you're not forced to do it. I don't yell, okay? But nobody's forced to do anything. We do everything voluntarily, and that's what individual soul liberty is. S, this is a handy one. Okay, you say this one should be first. Well, it's just that the word S appears later in the word Baptist. Okay, a saved church membership. Baptists practice saved church membership, meaning that only individuals who have made a credible profession of faith in Christ are eligible for membership in the local church. And of course, this is tied very much to the believer's baptism. We're going to talk about in a few pages, not today, but later on, the halfway covenant, because you had Congregationalists here in America, who, I think it's Congregationalists, where they had the children of baptized parents were, automatically part of their church, but you had the case where if your parents were not Christians, then you couldn't get baptized if they were not members. And it goes into it a little bit more than that. And so they had people that were non-believers in the church just because they got baptized as infants and held to be members without a profession of faith later on. So go figure. Did a mess come from it? Yes. Okay. So Baptists, the first thing that I'll do as I see somebody coming into church, the first thing I'm going to find out is, oh, so how did you get saved? Okay. What kind of church background do you have? That's what I'll ask first. What kind of church background do you have, so I can assess, where they might be coming from. Well, Alan, you're right. I looked into your salvation the first time you ever showed up. If you can reflect back on that, okay, that was by design. I did it to Donna too, and Kathy too, and everybody else too. Okay, Nora got saved over what's his name? Bed in the hospital. Julie's third child. What's his name? Jason. Jason was sick in the hospital, having been newborn, and Nora got the gospel at the hospital there. And Brother Tone was over in the Philippines, and somebody was working on him. Everybody has to go through that. You're not saved, then you are not eligible for membership. And this is a problem in churches today, where they're letting people in, churches of all kinds, that shouldn't be let in. And what you're getting is an unregenerate membership. Okay, the next T, 2 offices, pastor, elder, and deacon. I'm not going to go into it now. I can go into it in a different kind of lesson. Pastors are elders, are presbyters, are bishops, are episcopoi. It's all one office. Okay, it's just talking about 3 separate functions of the pastoral office, and then you have the office of the deacon. Pastors and elders are responsible for spiritual leadership and teaching. Deacons assist with practical and administrative matters. Okay, and who rules the church? The congregation, not the pastor and not a board of elders. The last one, S, separation of church and state. Baptists believe in the separation of religious institutions from governmental or political authorities, and you can see that in our Constitution. This principle emphasizes the autonomy of the local church, the rejection of state interference or control in matters of faith and worship. See, when you're coming out of the centralized church mentality, and you're saying we are not governed by the state, you maintain a separation. We have what's called a 501c3 letter from the IRS for the purposes of tax deductions for your offerings and things like that. That letter does not determine that we are a church. Okay, churches, anything that organizes itself as a church, is automatically a 501c3 organization, automatically, by default. You get that letter because you have something handy to say that you let the IRS know that you're going to have people that are going to make deductions, and they say, okay, it is not one that authorizes us as a church. There are certain functions, like when I go to perform a wedding. Okay, when I came into New Jersey and I was a young preacher and I was wondering about this, as I was going to perform my first wedding, and did I have to register or something to be able to make this official act? And I went over to City Hall and they said, no, you don't need anything. And the reason why is because it is the church that determines its affairs, how they're going to perform a wedding. And so that is left up to the churches. So you have these kind of things. Our church discipline, when we have a matter where there's a believer having a problem with another believer, you can't take it to court. If you do, you're being unbiblical, and also the courts don't want to hear it. They will say, you've got your bylaws. Did you operate within your bylaws? Now, if your bylaws say that you're allowed to murder somebody, the state does have a valid interest that you can't go to murder anybody. But on matters governing how we take care of problems between believers, that's left up to the churches. And a judge, I think judges have said or could say, what does your bylaws say? And they will judge you by your bylaws, not by state law. It all depends on what the issue is, though. So some things like murder or stealing, yeah, that's a different kind of problem. Okay, so we have separation, and we put the church above the state. We will obey God rather than man, if it comes down to that. Now we'll do all the code corrections for the building, we'll do all that kind of stuff, but if the state said you can't go out and witness to people on the streets of Bayonne, I'd say, see ya. Okay, we're going to go out and do it, and they'll say, well, we'll put you in jail. Now, there was a problem with that in Journal Square, and where there were some believers that were doing that, and they were told they couldn't. I don't know what the final outcome of that was, but my counsel would have been, you go and witness, get yourself arrested so that it can be taken to court and then be adjudicated that way. And these are big issues. There's a case or two before the Supreme Court right now that deal with religious freedom. Okay, so there's that. So no state supremacy. It is the church above the state. Okay, finally, let's look at the top of page 205. There are several important issues to recognize about these distinctives. This acronym is not a creed that one must confess to be a Baptist. It's more like a reputation. Those who identify as Baptists came to be commonly known for these stances. Next bullet point, with these distinctives, Baptists cannot properly be called a denomination. They'll form working relationships in associations and conventions, but they zealously guard their identity as being independent and autonomous. This is in spite of whether any association has formed any great social pressure to conform to standard. Next bullet point, while some in our modern times do not use the name Baptist because of some falsely perceived marketing disadvantage, that's what I referred to earlier, there are many non-denominational churches that can identify with these distinctives. And then lastly, although these distinctives touch on some theological issues, there are many issues that are not included in the distinctives. Okay, there are other things. Baptist churches commonly respect the right of each church to be responsible for their own doctrinal stands. I might not be able to help what's going on in that church over there with the doctrinal mess they're making up, but you know what? I'm responsible for here. We're responsible for this place. Whatever anybody else gets wrong, we have to determine what we're going to do, and we can't just push it off to say, well, this is the way it's always been done or whatever. No, we've got to make those decisions. Okay. That's where I'm going to stop for this. I end up going into our discussion time, but I think I really wanted to get these two units together. You've got a question or two, or yes, Miss Donna, a nice microphone for her. That's a nice microphone, by the way. Yeah, nice prayers, nice, nice. Yeah.
I'm just curious if you ever had the occasion to reject someone's profession of faith as not being credible.
Oh yeah, sure, yeah. One that comes to mind is they're pretty incredible when they're incredible. Okay, a couple came and they wanted to get married, and the lady wanted to answer for her fiance, and I said, no, he's got to answer for himself. He couldn't answer right, and before I'll do a marriage, one of the qualifications, you got to both be saved. Of course, I will not do a mixed marriage that way. And so I said, well, let him answer for himself. And I thought, well, let him come back on his own, and then I'll interview him without your interference, because he was a little non-communicative. So I thought, well, let me try to work with him. Nancy, can you think of a case? Yeah.
One that really stands out, we were in the beginning days of the church. We had a man call us who, he was very slick in everything he said. And I think he thought that he was going to be the answer to all of our prayers. And since we were really trying to build up the congregation, he said, Pastor, I'll be your right-hand man. I'll do this, I'll do that. I have all these abilities, and I want to be your assistant. And my husband said, okay, well, I haven't even met you. First of all, we don't have a lot of those needs yet, but I would want to sit down and talk with you and make sure and he was very offended by that. And he started getting indignant and acting as though, look, I'm offering you all of this and you're questioning me. And it's really good that my husband questioned him, because as it turns out, he was trying to seek cover in a church as some sort of religious worker because he was a serial killer. And he is presently on death row.
Yeah.
Still, all these years on death row. He's written to us several times. It's been taken to court. It's been established that he actually did murder, a number of women. And a lot of times people will they sort of think that they're under the radar if they work in a church. They're very naive that way. They might be worldly wise, but if they think that they're going to be undetected just because they're in a church or get away with anything just because they work in a church, they're sadly mistaken.
Yeah.
So that was a very, very unbelievable testimony. He said all the right things because he had been around enough believers to know, say it this way, say it that way, say that you believe such and such. But we wanted to vet him first, and that got him irritated.
Yeah. Now, those are some of the more extreme kind of things that we can come up to answer your question. But there are some other things where somebody's not a Christian. It's just that they don't know a lot of things and they like what they see and they're trying to find a way to fit in. I remember somebody saying, oh, yes, I was saved. I was in an accident and God spared me, something along those lines. Well, no, that's not exactly salvation. Yeah, you were saved kind of, but not the kind of saved that we're talking about. And they just didn't have the understanding. We couldn't really make progress with them to help them really understand. They were so insistent upon that being their salvation and, had to pass on. But usually things like that are very quick. They're not, they reveal themselves that they just don't know the gospel. And they're like many people who, come and go over the years too. So you'll have an awful lot of that. Then you'll have a case where you'll have somebody who is saved, but their doctrinal distinctions are too far out. We've had several people who came in, they were Calvinists. And we said, yeah, sure, you can believe God is supreme. We think God is supreme. They have a little bit of different definition that they go into. But they, but as long as you want to serve God and you don't want to, push your excesses where there's an error, fine. But they themselves don't work out. They can't take that we're talking about free will so much. Now, in case like that, you'll find that none of us here agree 100% with each other. Okay, because we have the priesthood of the believer, we're supposed to be examining things, and so we're supposed to have commonly held beliefs. Some things that people believe do go too far and they won't be able to fit in. If somebody came here and they believed in the loss of salvation, they would have a problem because I'd be continually preaching, hey, God wants to keep you forever. And that none of us will perish. We can't be, nobody can take us out of the hand of God. And I can show that from John chapter 10. I can show all these verses about how we're forgiven completely for eternal life, not temporary life. And if you want to come in and you're constantly telling people, which is, by the way, a matter of manipulation, okay, you're not good enough. Okay, you didn't perform good enough. Okay, I think you lost your salvation. Okay, well, all you have to do is give more money to church. Okay, and then you can get your salvation back. See, if somebody comes in with that mentality, I would. It's not a question of their salvation that's there, but they're too far off base with their doctrine. Now, I might say, well, you're having a problem in life because you do need to get better with God. Okay, but that's different from saying you lost your salvation, kind of thing. Okay, so yeah, over the years, it's all kinds of things. It runs a gamut. Somebody else.
Yes.
Yeah. Yes, there you go.
Yeah, so I'm not exactly sure your process, but like here, when our pastors and elders are going to, interview someone for membership and everything that they filled out, have you ever had to call the other church they're coming from possibly to verify some stuff you had red flags about? And if you did, were you glad you did?
I can't remember the particular cases. I know there were several ones, and yes, we were glad. Nancy, can you
Yeah.
remember any of those?
Yeah, I just don't know how appropriate it would be to share the details.
Okay, yes. Can you
Well, no, but it's
disguise
just
it
like-
in some way?
Yeah,
Okay.
it's just like you felt there was red flags and you're like, I don't know, they sound good, this, that, and the other thing, what they wrote, what they're saying to us. However, let's check them out.
Yeah, and in fact, churches. This is not this is not always done. It's a good idea to do when somebody comes from another church. They should. We should. They have a thing where they say we send for their church letter. I'm not
Right,
quite sure
right.
how that phrase came to be, but. I have a form that says if somebody wrote to us and said, somebody wants to be a member of this from your church, they're transferring down to here now, and I'll send a church letter that says yes, they were a member in good standing. However, okay. Now I am thinking of some other times. I had one time. I'm thinking of. I'll disguise this perfectly well enough. Somebody who'd had an issue here. They had gone to another church, and the pastor was a semi-friend of mine. I say semi because we just don't have enough contact, but we're very friendly with each other and like each other an awful lot. And he gave me a call and said, how about so-and-so? He just wanted to be a church member here. He said, when I asked him, did you have any problem at People's Baptist Church? He says, well, I don't think so, but Pastor Zeron might. So... So I got the call, and I said, yes, I do. Okay, this is the circumstance of their leaving. And the guy was being very honest about it, came back and apologized and joined the other church. I have had several times with other churches in the area where somebody had come out to church from another church, and I understood what they were going through. As I say, I will commiserate with anybody with whatever problem they have. But I said, tell you what you do. I'd love to have you be here at church. It would be great to have you here at church. Perhaps there's a ministry that you can't do over there that we have available for here. However, go back and talk to Pastor so-and-so. You try to straighten this out first. Okay? If you do, then no harm, no foul. That'll be great. They went back, they straightened it out, and they continued. I can remember one case, a couple that came, they did not want to get it straightened out, and they didn't last here either. Okay, they separated from here because for the same reason they separated from the other church. So yeah, there's a lot of times where I find it good if somebody's got a problem, send them back to get it straightened out, or to call the pastor myself. And this is just professional courtesy. If I'm going to inherit this person, and if they were an honest member of there, they would, just like you have references that you get from people. This is the thing to do. So you want to make sure that there's no outstanding issue that they have to take care of. And I'm thinking of others who've been members here that, yeah, they got the thing straightened out and worked out fine. But yeah, there is a need for keeping those considerations. And that is according to our bylaws. Okay, they have reference to that in our bylaws. So when a person becomes a member, you are saying, I am in agreement in the covenant with this way of doing things. It is not vindictive. It is something that protects you so that we can minister to individuals here in an open and transparent way. If somebody's wanting to hide something, that's a different kind of problem. So yeah, they should. We should be welcoming that. Now, that doesn't mean I'm going to tell you all about somebody else's problem. This is a professional counseling problem to deal with. If you want to share something, if you share something publicly, then I'll feel free to reference that in the future because you determined to make it public. Okay, something else. Anybody else? Okay, well, yes, sir.
Some institutions, although not named Baptist, may have identical views, theological views as we do, and we in fact get news that some now preaching as Baptist preachers came from these institutions. What I'm referring to Bob Jones.
Yeah.
How is Bob Jones considered, Pastor?
Oh, okay. I'm not totally up on Bob Jones University right now. That's Bob Jones University is not so much the problem as much as a person coming from there. Okay. You can doesn't just because you graduated from there doesn't mean that you might have all of the views. Like for instance, the current president of Bob Jones is he's not a strong Calvinist, but he's a Calvinist. Okay, so that's going to influence some of the teachings that are going on down there, or it might be a Bible version issue kind of thing. But I've got one friend that came from Clark Summit, which was a Calvinist school. Pastor Jeremy Rice, I believe he came from there. He's not a Calvinist. He's, nothing like that. He's a great fundamentalist. So it's really the individual. I think probably more germane would be something like, would we take somebody as a member who was baptized in a non-Baptist church? Some Baptist churches are more strict. They say, no, you have to come from a Baptist church. Without going into it, I could argue against that. Okay, if it's a church that preaches the gospel and they preach that baptism doesn't save, and if they baptize somebody in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost, then we'll accept that kind of baptism. Okay, so it could have, Podunk Community Church or something like that. If it's got a gospel in it and baptism, we'll take that very easily. Miss Nancy.
Yeah, Bob Jones University is not a Baptist college.
Right.
It is a non-denominational school.
Right.
So a lot of people, for some reason, think it's a Baptist school. It
Right.
never was. In fact, it was founded by a Methodist
yeah.
deliberately to be non-denominational. And I remember my brother-in-law having trouble with some of the graduates from there. Good, earnest men. They wanted to start churches, and they had no idea what to do because at that school, you're not going to get that. And so he had to walk them through the process of starting a church because he understood how to do it.
Yeah.
And in fact, I had been accepted at BJU when I was applying to different colleges. And it was my brother-in-law who said to me, well, how strong do you feel about being a Baptist? And I said, oh, very strong. And he said, you might want to have second thoughts. If you were, because I had gone to their prospective students' day. I had friends of mine that highly recommended it. And back then it was a much more, they really stuck to their standards back then much more so than they do now.
Yeah.
Now they've made a lot of concessions in order to get more students, which is always a mistake.
Yeah.
It's always, you should never do that. And they emphasize what they offer and excellence in training and all that, which is good.
Yeah.
But the spiritual is always more important.
Yeah.
And I think they've, in recent years, sacrificed some of that.
Yeah, there's still reasons. I mean, if somebody goes there, that's one thing. That's fine. If you want to be a Baptist preacher, I would recommend a Baptist college or a church Bible institute. Even they have a number of small colleges that are opening up that way. Pastor Recker, I think, is from Bob Jones, and you've heard his preaching, and you're not going to find anything as a problem there. So that's what I mean. You might come from there. It doesn't mean that you've adopted all their views. Miss
Right.
Nancy
Yeah,
again.
that goes to the point because Reverend Siebold, he was a Bob Jones graduate.
Yeah.
He's a fiery Baptist.
Yeah.
As well as Evangelist Dan Souza, who went to Clark Summit, in the height of its Calvinist teaching, and he is so not Calvinist. And by the way, that school in Clark Summit also compromised to the point of dropping everything in their name. Then they called themselves Summit University, and today they don't exist at all.
Yeah.
They compromised to the point where they just compromised themselves right out of business, and they no longer exist.
Oh yeah, the Baptist college that we went to is facing. I just heard the other day from a friend of mine, is going through great struggles, and we had separated from them, supporting them because of the compromises that they had made, and that's the history of the church. You come out of a time of persecution, you're strong, you start compromising, and then you die off, only to be replaced by a new revival. Okay, so it's bad, but hey, it's also normal. Yeah, Ms. Nancy.
Yeah, and the irony, and it's very sad, when we were in school, they taught us, be sure you do not let your guard down and make these compromises, and their administration did exactly those things during the last 40 years.
Yeah.
And I'm sure they're sorry for it now, but it's too late.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. So what you do is you go to People's Baptist Church because we're perfect. Well, what you do is you go to People's Baptist Church and you try to make it perfect as possible. Okay. Well, with that, we've gone actually about 15 minutes over than we might normally, but I think this is a good thing to have gone through because this is laying the foundation for this next Philadelphia age that's coming. Okay, let's close in a word of prayer. Brother Tone,